Hello, my friends. I'm the Nine Dots guy, and it's great to be with you all again. Today we're going to talk about something deep. That feeling in the hearts of Chinese people, that sense of awe for the West. When did that scale start to balance out? My whole point here is that we have to look at China from the world's perspective, not just look at the world from China's. This isn't a simple question. It's not like our GDP passed some milestone one day and everyone suddenly stood up straight. No. Behind this is a story that's decades long, a story of the heart and mind of a nation, tangled up with blood, sweat, tears, passion, pride, and a deep sense of inferiority. So today, I want to break it all down for you. How has the way Chinese people see the world and the West changed step by step since 1949? If you go ask someone in North Korea today, they will tell you with total conviction that their country is the greatest in the world, that their people are the happiest, their leader the most brilliant. You might find that laughable, but what he's telling you is the complete and total truth, as he knows it. Okay, now just to rewind that scene a few decades and drop it in China during my parents' youth. The logic was exactly the same. It was an era of a complete physical information lockdown. In our eyes, the world was a simple black and white picture. On one side, there was us, living in bliss under the glow of our great leader. On the other side, there was them, suffering under the boot of capitalists waiting for us to come and save them. And them, for the most part, meant the American imperialists. Let me tell you a true story from my dad that sounds like a joke now. He was an apprentice in a factory back then, and the most important spiritual food of the day was after work, when hundreds of workers would gather around the giant loudspeaker to listen to editorials from the People's Daily. One time, the announcer, in this incredibly passionate voice, was listing the crimes of American imperialism. It basically boiled down to two things. One, that America was hell-bent on destroying us, and two, that two-thirds of the American people were living on the brink of starvation and death every single day. After every sentence the announcer read, the crowd below would shout a slogan. Decades later, my dad set foot in the United States for the first time. His old classmate, who was hosting him, drove him to a warehouse store called Costco. And as my dad pushed this enormous shopping cart past mountains of beef, chicken legs, bread, and milk, he told me his mind just went completely blank. There was only one thought echoing over and over again. So, what exactly are the other two-thirds? You see, that giant, absurd gap between reality and what you were told, that was the backdrop of the era. It wasn't just a simple information blockade, it was a systematic reshaping of the human mind. The name of the game was class struggle. The most important relationship between people was to watch each other, to suspect each other. Your father's job, your grandfather's social class. These things were like an invisible brand on your forehead, deciding your entire future. Having a bad family background was a kind of original sin. It meant you were a second-class citizen when it came to getting to school, finding a job, joining the army, even falling in love. This environment created this really conflicted national psyche. On the one hand, you had this fake sense of superiority when looking at the outside world, this bubble of we are the happiest blown up by the propaganda machine. On the other hand, inside your own society you had this extreme insecurity where everyone was terrified of making a mistake. The whole country was running on this twisted mix of false pride and genuine fear. So, for people back then, there was no concept of looking up or looking down at the West. There was only a pure, drilled-in hostility. It wasn't that they didn't want to see the world, it's that they had no idea another real world even existed. Sometimes the turning points in history are just incredibly dramatic. With the death of the great leader, and a political shuffle that was basically a palace coup, the giant ship of China made a sudden sharp turn. Those words, reform and opening up, didn't sound as glorious back then as they do today. For ordinary people who were tired of being jerked around by politics, they were nervous. Letting families form their own plots, isn't that the capitalist road? Allowing private business? Isn't that undermining socialism? But all arguments about ideology seem pretty pathetic when you are starving. The logic of the common person is always the most practical. Whoever can fill my belly and give me a better life, that's who I'll follow. When people discovered that they could farm their own land and keep whatever was left after giving the state its share, thousands of years of pent-up agricultural ambition just exploded overnight. And so, that gate that had been sealed shut for decades was finally pried open by the forces of history. Then the light came flooding. At first it was faint. Maybe it was a sharp cassette player a relative brought back from overseas, or a night spent huddled around it, listening to the love songs of a Taiwanese singer named Teresa Tan. Then the light got brighter. TV shows from Japan like Katsueki Gata and Joshivoli, and American shows like Garrison's Gorillas became the collective memory of a generation. For the first time, we saw that girls could be so fashionable that life could look like that. When that crack in the door was thrown wide open, what we saw wasn't just another world, it was a miracle. I have a good friend, an old professor, who told me about his first trip to Japan in the early 90s. I'll never forget his story. He was a visiting scholar staying in an apartment at a Tokyo university. One day he wanted a Coke. A Japanese colleague took him downstairs to a metal box and pointed at the button. The professor just froze. It was a vending machine. He watched his colleague put in a coin, press a button, and clank, an ice-cold can of Coke dropped out. He told me, "Son, do you know how I felt at that moment? It didn't feel like a machine. It felt like magic." I stood in front of that thing for 10 minutes, just staring at it. I kept thinking, is there a little person hiding inside? How does it know what money is? How does it give me the right thing? It just didn't make any sense. A single vending machine was enough to blow the mind of a top Chinese intellectual, so can you imagine the psychological shock when ordinary Chinese people saw in movies and magazines the skyscrapers of Manhattan, the single-family homes with lawns in California, the endless aisles of a Walmart? It was complete and a total demolition of our self-confidence. Wow, it's great. Fake pinnacle of the world we had built in our minds for 30 years just crumbled in an instant. It turned out we weren't the happiest. We might have actually been the poorest and the most backward. This huge psychological whiplash gave birth to the mainstream philosophy of the time, total Westernization. From elite scholars to the man on the street, there was an unspoken consensus. We weren't good enough. Our culture, our system, it was all flawed from the very beginning. Everything from the West was advanced, civilized, maybe even perfect. In China, there was a TV documentary back then called The River Elegy that was a massive hit. Its core idea was that our yellow, landlocked dragon culture was closed off and backward, while the West's blue, maritime civilization was open and powerful. A view that seems almost like national self-hatred today was met with a powerful nationwide consensus back then. That was the looking up of that era. It wasn't simple envy. It was a kind of hopeless, guilt-ridden, total worship. The saying, the moon is round abroad, wasn't a metaphor back then. For many, it was an article of faith. What goes down must come up. When a nation's self-esteem hits rock bottom, any little spark can start a wildfire. After we entered the 21st century, especially after joining the WTO, we became the world's factory. With our endless supply of cheap labor and a massive market, China's economy began to take off. You could literally see the cities changing before your eyes. Skyscrapers shot up, highways wove into a massive web. Life for ordinary people got better day by day. This rapid accumulation of material wealth began to quietly heal our shattered national pride. People started to think to themselves, maybe we are not so bad after all. The moment that turned this uncertainty into certainty was 2008. That was the year China started to look the world eye to eye. Two huge things happened in 2008. First, the Beijing Olympics. I still remember the night of the opening ceremony when those giant printing press blocks rose and fell on the stadium floor, when the gymnast Li Ning was suspended in the air, flying to light the Olympic flame. A friend of mine, a guy who was usually super cynical, just went silent. After a long time, he took a big swig of his baijiu and said to me, "Damn it, is it so hard to just admit that we are awesome?" That Olympic Games, in its flawless, artistically stunning, state-powered perfection, showed the entire world China's ability to organize, our cultural depth, and our economic power. It was a shot of adrenaline straight into the heart of every Chinese person. For the first time, we truly felt that we didn't just belong at the table with the top players in the world. We could also throw the best party. And in that very same year, something else happened. The Wall Street financial crisis, which swept the globe. The United States, the country we had looked up to for decades as a beacon of civilization, the very heart of capitalism, whose financial system we treated as gospel, suddenly had a massive heart attack. Lehman Brothers collapsed. Wall Street cratered. The Western world was in chaos. These two events happening in the same year created an incredibly powerful and dramatic contrast. The question started to bubble up. Was this the beginning of the East rising and West falling? The contrast forced Chinese people, for the first time, to look at the Western model with a calm, critical eye. It turned out you weren't invincible. Your theories could fail too. And our China model, the one you were always criticizing, actually seemed pretty effective when it came to handling a crisis. The term state-run system got a new definition that year. Before, it was often associated with inefficiency and rigidity. But the success of the Olympics and the response to the financial crisis led many to believe that this model, when it came to concentrating power to get big things done, had an unparalleled advantage. And so, the way we looked at the West quietly changed. We went from that inferiority tinged looking up to a more cautious, confident eye-to-eye view. We admitted you were still ahead of us in many ways, but we no longer worshipped you. We started to believe that the path we were on, though different, might just lead to Rome after all. If 2008 was the beginning of looking eye to eye, then after 2012, that gaze in some areas started to carry a hint of looking down. The confidence for this looking down came first from overtaking on the curve in technology and lifestyle. The most classic example is mobile payments. A friend of mine who works in the US came back to visit a few years ago. We were out to dinner, and when it was time to pay, I pulled out my phone, scanned a QR code, and it was done in less than 3 seconds. He was shocked. He pulled out his credit card and asked me, "You guys don't use this anymore?" He told me that in that moment, for the first time, he felt that America, the country that had always represented the future, had been left behind by China in terms of daily convenience. High-speed rail, the sharing economy, e-commerce logistics, things that are now a normal part of life in China are still novelties in many Western countries. This sense of superiority born from technology and lifestyle is extremely concrete and powerful. It gives ordinary people, especially the younger generation who never experienced real hardship, a gut feeling that in many ways we are already more advanced than you. At the same time, all sorts of problems began to pop up inside the Western world, the refugee crisis in Europe, the social divisions in America, waves of terrorist attack, and later the systematic failures exposed by the pandemic. All of this was intentionally amplified and interpreted for us through China's state news and all kinds of social media. The joke we always made about the 3 acts of the evening news in China is that Act 1, the leaders are busy. Act 2, the Chinese people are happy. Act 3, the rest of the world is in chaos. Used to be just a joke. But now, for many people, especially the youth, they are starting to think, wait, is this actually true? This dynamic of our rise and their troubles finally hit a boiling point during 2 major tests, the US-China trade war and the COVID-19 pandemic. The official narrative became clearer and more powerful than ever. The only reason America is trying to suppress us is not because we did something wrong, but because we did everything right. We are just too strong, so strong that they are scared. The dual narrative of being both the victim and the rising hero is an incredibly powerful glue. It successfully turned external pressure into internal national pride and a sense of utility against a common foe. And the response to the pandemic, at least in the media narrative, was a textbook contrast. On our side, one order was given and 1.4 billion people stayed home. 2 massive hospitals, Huoshenshan and Leishenshan, were built in 10 days. Meanwhile, what we saw from the West on the news was endless arguments, anti-science rhetoric, and out-of-control infection numbers. Even though we later found out some of China's lockdown policies were inhumane and trampled on individual rights. This stark contrast made the term confidence in our system transform from a propaganda slogan into a genuine belief for many ordinary people. And so, the little pinks rose up on the internet. These are young people who grew up during China's two most glorious decades. They have no historical baggage. They've only witnessed a powerful rising China and declining West. Their patriotism is sincere, but their worldview has also been shaped by the Great Firewall and an information bubble. In their eyes, any criticism of China is a malicious smear, and any praise for the West is a treacherous act of brown-nosing. The story of Song Bingbing, the daughter of one of China's founding generals, Song Renqiong, is a really deep and telling slice of history. Picture this. She's on the Tiananmen rostrum, and she gets to put a red guard armband on Chairman Mao himself. Mao asks her name. She says Song Bingbing. Now the character for Bing is from the phrase 文质彬彬, which means to be refined, gentle, and scholarly. So Mao tells her, don't be 文, refined, be 武, martial. Basically, he was telling her to be fierce, not gentle. So shortly after that, she changed her name. Wow, she took that character for martial Wu and it became Song Yao Wu. The name Yao Wu literally means glorious martial power. Not long after that, in August of 1966, the vice principal of her high school, a woman named Bian Zhongyun, was beaten to death by a group of young people. Song Yaowu was widely considered to be the main organizer of this struggle session. Bian Zhongyun became the very first educator to be killed in this way during the Cultural Revolution. This tragedy really shows you something about passionate political movements. Young people, often clueless about the ideologies they are caught up in, can easily be used and pushed to the front lines, committing acts they can never forgive themselves for. It's just like what the writer Milan Kundera talked about in one of his novels. He had this idea that youth is terrifying. He said that young people standing on stages, they don't fully understand, shout slogans, they only half comprehend. But the one thing that defines them is their immense capacity for destruction. And that's why we have to be so cautious about the young people who get swept up in the struggle mentality. They are often completely unaware of the damage they are causing because they genuinely believe they are fighting for some great cause for all of humanity, but their impact on society is often devastating. When that kind of ignorance is combined with slogan-fueled passion and turns into action, it's often the beginning of a human catastrophe. And this is just something that happened in China. It's a tragedy we've seen happen again and again, all over the world. This extremism has caused the space for public discussion to shrink dramatically. Most rational, moderate voices have chosen to stay silent to avoid being labeled unpatriotic or a traitor. This creates a kind of survivorship bias. Online, it looks as if fervent nationalism has become the one and only unshakable mainstream opinion. All right, man. We've pretty much gone through the whole story now, from hostility to looking up, to looking eye to eye, and to that faint sense of looking down today. We've walked this road so fast, so impatiently, that maybe we forgot to stop and think, after the flood waters recede, what are we left standing on? I have to admit, I'm worried. What are we so proud of right now? the convenience of mobile payments, the speed of our infrastructure, the state's ability to mobilize these things I call them the hardware, the tools. And we've done a really good job with them. But what about the software? The more fundamental things, like the ability to produce original, groundbreaking science and an education system that cultivates independent and critical thinking, a social environment where everyone, regardless of their opinion, can express themselves without fear. Are we equally confident in these areas? We always say that we walked in a few decades a path that took the West centuries. That's a remarkable achievement, but the other side of that coin is that we've also compressed centuries of problems into just a few decades. The wealth gap, a rigid social hierarchy, environmental pollution, a collective spiritual exhaustion. These problems don't just disappear because our GDP gets bigger. True strength isn't an emotion, it's a capability. It's the courage to face your own problems head on. It's the wisdom to appreciate and learn from your rival's strength. And more than anything, it's the composure to tolerate different voices. From that perspective, we might still have a long way to go before we are truly strong. So let's go back to our original question. Why did we stop looking up to the West? The answer is this. Because through the blood, sweat, and wisdom of generations, we finally climbed high enough to sit at the same table as the giants we once revered. We saw the wrinkles and fatigue on their faces, and in doing so, we found our own pulse, our own breath. This is a necessary step in the maturing of a nation, but the true sign of maturity isn't trading looking up for looking down. It's learning how to look eye to eye with a clear head, looking at your rival as an equal, and most importantly, looking at yourself with that same clarity. After all, this world is a big place, and the best part of the story is just getting started. That's all of my story today. See you next time. Bye bye.